everybody, Sven Diesel here. We're going to be tying the Wiggly popper. The reason I call it that is because we're going to be using a articulation shank here on the back to tie in the bulk of our body of this popper fly. And so let's go ahead and get that started. And this is going to wiggle, and it's a popper. So it's pretty straightforward. We have a 15 millimeter shank here in the vise, and we're going to make sure it's nice and secure. I'm using a Semperfli. This is a 8/0 wax thread. You could also use a GSP or a nano silk. You could also step it up to a 6/0, but we're going to be cleaning up the body quite a bit, and so I'm going with a little bit of a lighter thread than I typically would for something like this. But we'll go ahead and close up the shank on that shank, and we'll go ahead and straighten it in our vise so it looks a little better for the camera. And we're going to be tying in quite a bit of hackle and a little bit of flash. I know that's not my normal thing, but what I like to do on a lot of these poppers I've tied and fished in the past is I like to have the core of the tail be this flash. And I apologize, I don't know the name of this or where I got it. I just have a loose sleeve of this in a few colors like green and pearl. And I'm just going to fold it in half and tie it on the shank of the hook so it's right there on top. And then as I get to the back, I'll kind of fan it around. And we can trim it at this point roughly 2-3 inches. And I'll just trim it at a taper. I don't really want them to be even. And I could spend a lot more time on that, but it just wants something a little bit flashy going through the core of this tail and give it a little bit of structure. And so then as I proceed backwards, I kind of fanned it out so that it's spread evenly around that shank. And some people would cut off the eye of that shank, but that's not necessary. For this pattern, we're going to be using this American hackle by Whiting Farms. It's one of my favorite streamer hackles. This is the saddle. I've got it in a bunch of colors, and it just comes in handy because it's got really stiff tips, and then it also has some of the webbiness as you get down into the base of the feather, and as you look at the back of the saddle, it's just ultra webby. So really good material. I'm just going to tie it in, and if you've ever watched any of my other videos, I like doing these hackle cones. What it is we're creating profile using one of these feathers, and this is by far the best feather I've seen to do these. So you can see how those fibers by the tip is really stiff, almost like I won't call it a dry fly hackle, but it is a rooster, and so it is stiff. And then as we get down here towards the base, they get a little bit softer, a little bit webbier, and so that the stiff fibers create a profile. They want to stand straight up the way we just palmered that around the shank here. And I'll go ahead and trim that out. And what I'm going to do is just preen those back with using my fingers to kind of spread them all along that shank in an even way, and then I'll just jump my thread back over that to form a hackle cone. And then of course you can clean that up with as many thread wraps as you want. If you're using a heavier thread, I wouldn't recommend a lot because we're going to be adding multiple hackle cones on this rear. So you can see right there we've got a nice little the beginnings of our profile, and I'm going to take some of these runners here and strip them off, and we'll tie them in. And this I would think that this is going to imitate frog legs on a popper, something spreading out, but at the same time it's also creates and mimics so many different things. And so we're just going to be preening these and prepping them and matching them up so they're about the same length. And as we progress up this shank, we'll progressively taper them. Now, this fly here is actually one that we're tying up for a Autism Awareness campaign. And so I typically wouldn't tie this in these bright colors, but we're going to have a lot of fun with this. So if I were going to tie this, I would definitely do it in white, all black, olives, maybe some yellows. And if you're going to be doing some sort of in the salt, you could use some of these brighter colors that we're going to be using. But typically I would tie these all in natural colors. But for this Autism Awareness fly, we're going to be having a little bit of fun with the colors here. I'm trying to color coordinate with the eyes that we're going to be using for the campaign. And so I'm going to alternate colors throughout this. If I were doing this to just regular, fish
for bass or trout or whatever you're going to fish this for, as a topwater fly, I would definitely stick with the natural colors. And so we're doing a second hackle cone here, and you can see I selected a feather that's just a little bit bigger, and we'll progressively work our way up with these cones into bigger and bigger feathers. But that's a pretty good sized yellow cone right there. And I'll advance my thread back, and I might have gone a little bit too far on this. Usually I do about 4 cones on this, but I kind of went back on that because I really wanted to get a little bit more bulk there at the back. And then we'll just take some smaller feathers in the yellow to kind of color coordinate. And like I said, if I was tying this to fish and not for the campaign, I may do black with maybe some hot colors as the runners, or incorporate grizzly kind of overall. But we'll just tie that in so that it's that hackle cone is kind of pushing that feather out. As you get it wet, they're going to want to go together, but then as it rests, they're going to splay out. And the hackle doesn't add a lot of weight either. I mean, we got, this isn't going to be super, super heavy to toss around. I've thrown some pretty heavy flies that have tails like this. The dragon tail is a good example. Those are heavy to cast. And so using a lot of these hackle fibers, you're not going to get that additional weight. And so we've progressed now, a third of the way up this shank here. And so we'll just continue to do this, making a hackle cone, and then running the feathers over to increase our tail, increase the splayness, increase the barring, and create a really, really nice taper, a really, really nice body, and not adding a ton of weight. So the next color for this, we're going to use blue. And once again, if this wasn't for the campaign, I'd probably do different colors. But this blue is a really, really awesome, I don't know if it's called Kingfisher blue. I threw away the package, but all of these are from the same Whiting Farms, the American Hackle line in the Rooster saddle. And so we'll just palmer it. And as you're palmering these, you don't need to be too particular on trapping fibers, because like I said, we're just trying to add profile, and we're wrapping back over it. And so I'm going to kind of zip through this now so you get the point, and we're just going to keep doing the same thing, adding the 2 feathers. We'll do another hackle cone, and we're going to tie in a bright chartreuse now. This is probably one of my favorite colors to fish as a popper. It just seems to be super, super effective, mimicking frogs or being just that natural attractor for bass. I seem to think that bass and chartreuse go hand in hand. The only thing that you need to be a little bit careful of is this eye. You don't really want to crowd your eye. You want to leave a little bit of room, and so I've left about a 1/16 of an inch there that I'm able to tie in these last feathers, making sure that they're splaying out. And you can see that V we've created now using those hackle cones. It's very, very obvious because you can see the barring coming off. And it's just a really, really awesome technique that I've incorporated into a bunch of different patterns. But this has added a lot of bulk to the rear of this popper fly without a ton of weight. And, this is going to help maybe even float since it is rooster. But, usually I like this to drown a little bit, and, I'm stripping it and popping it. And so it's not going to be too much of a burden to stay on the top. And so we're just going to color our thread here so that it looks nice and pretty to match. And like I said, if you're doing a darker version, just use black thread. And if you're doing chartreuse, it's not going to affect it if you got a little white spot right there. It's not going to be seen. But there we go. That's the rear section. A little trick: if you got any fibers that are kind of crowding your eye there, just burn them off, making sure to cover the hackle so you don't burn that. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of thin UV resin to kind of really soak in there and bond those front fibers, just because we didn't really tie in a ton of stem. But look at that. That's just super, super pretty. Nice V. It's got a really nice profile, really nice bulk body. Look at that flash just integrated in there. This is really, really pretty. I'm super stoked on how this turned out. and we used about 10 feathers plus 6 hackle cones, so roughly 16 feathers, which is quite a bit. Normally I'd probably stick to 8 to 10, but I'm making this a little extra pretty. Now we're going to get an Ahrex hook in the vise. This is a PR 350. I really like the bend on this, especially for top water. And this is a size 1/0. And we're going to put on this fish skull howitzer head. And this is, I believe, the large size. And so I'm just kind of visually marking where I do this. A lot of times I'll prep these and put the heads on before and then tie the bodies. But since we're just kind of doing a freestyle wiggly popper, we'll just show the whole process here if you're just tying one at a time. But if you're tying up a bunch of them, it is better to just put all the heads on and finish the heads and then tie the fly on. But we're going to secure the rear section with this spider wire. It's a 50-pound test. It lays a little bit flat, which I like. It's not quite circular. It's kind of an oval material. And I've had really good luck with this. I have confidence in it. And so we'll just tie that in so it goes a little bit down into the bend. And then I'll show you a little technique I use here to help with the fouling. We don't need to worry about it on this, but it's just I do it for most of my articulated streamers. I'm going to run the braid through the one side, and then it's kind of not on center on the top of the shank. It's kind of on the opposing side right now. And it's a little tricky to do this because we got this extra material, and you're wondering why do you have so much material on there. And it just makes it a little bit easier to work with when I'm going to run it back through. So that's right. I'm going to put this back through again. So I'm going to position it where I want it. I'm going to advance my thread so that we got a bunch of wraps on the shank of this hook. If I was having a rear stinger hook, I'd probably run it through the eye because these have a little bit of a bigger eye. And then we'll advance it back down. And now the spider wire is on my side. And so I'm going to shove the spider wire up through on my side and be a little bit mindful since we have a ton of it. And then when I pull it through, I'm going to keep it on my side. So basically we have 2 sections of this going through that on each side, which I think helps limit the ability for it to twist and foul, because you got 2 points going through one hole. It limits the ability to twist on you. But also, I think it's also extra durable, especially when I got that stinger hook. That way I know I got plenty of confidence in it. And we'll just clean up that shank, getting that spire wire with some really, really cranking wraps. And then we will leave our thread here up at the top, and I'm going to build up a little bit of a thread dam. And I'll show you why here in a minute. I love to do these on these poppers because it creates something like a dam so that when we shove the popper head on with the glue, it's not going to want to come off. And I also love coloring it red or orange. I don't know why. It's almost like the popper sticking its tongue out at you. It's I don't know, maybe just a little bit of flair that I think is kind of fun when tying these. So this is not necessary, I guess. I just realized I only do it for fun, thinking it's sticking its tongue out. But I extend my poppers back a little bit so that, especially with these howitzer heads, makes it a little easier to tie on. And so I'm just going to color this red. It's okay that you get it on the hook because I'm just going to use my finger right now and just brush it. It's still wet on the hook part of the eye, and I just rub my finger across it, and it will get that permanent or that Sharpie off and get it onto your finger. So we'll advance our thread back to the back, and then we're going to continue with our color scheme. Like I said, these are bright colors for this Autism Awareness. I think I've said that enough times now that you know we're going to be using some bright, fun colors. So the next color up will be yellow, again, the grizzly yellow. And with this first section, it's really important to get a nice, really good cone to flow into that rear section. And also, this will limit the movement of that rear section. I just want it to wiggle more. And so by creating a hackle cone here, it's going to restrict the movement to what the hackle cone is. And so I'll probably do 2 feathers on this first section just to really make a really nice big transition piece and a flow for that hackle cone. And so we'll just do the same process we did on the rear portion, And I forgot to mention, I laid down a little bit of super glue there, because the super glue is going to bond the spider wire to the hook shank. It's going to bind the thread to the hook shank, and now we know that the hook and our rear section are one. So we're going to go ahead and speed this up. Like I said, we're adding 2 feathers back here, and so we got a really nice transition cone there, and then we'll just continue the process of adding the feathers, and then adding sections of hackle cone, and we're probably going to get 2 full color rotations here. As we get through the blue, I'll add the trailers, and then we'll go ahead and finish with the chartreuse section, which is kind of what I had planned in the beginning. Like I said, I love the chartreuse, and you got to be a little bit mindful of where your popper needs to end, or where the popper will sit. And so I often bring that popper head up and measure it. You can see I'm leaving a little bit of a gap there. You can go as tight as you want. I prefer to leave a little bit of room, because we're going to be doing some tab legs here, which is more of a conventional fishing, and it's going to be putting a bass skirt on. But the eyes for this campaign, you normally wouldn't have to do this. The eyes I have are a little bit bigger than these holes that come with the howitzer head. And so if you're just using the right size eyes, you can just pop them in with the adhesive and let them sit, because we're going to cover this whole thing in a flexible resin. But I had to kind of make it a little bit bigger so that these eyes will pop in and stay in. And there we go. Those are really, really awesome eyes. These are by Dead Meat Customs for his Autism Awareness campaign. And so it's really neat what he's doing. And so I've been really lucky to contribute these to his auction. And so we'll get those in. And then the next key is, if somebody has a better trick for doing this, I would love for you to comment below. But what I do is I have this awl here, and you can see I've done it a couple times, and you determine your angle. For this one, I want it to sit almost flat, but I want to run it kind of on the bottom. And so what I do is I heat up this awl just using a lighter. It takes about 20 seconds to get it hot enough, and then we will run it through the howitzer head. And I like that this size is a little bit bigger of an awl, because I usually like to have a little bit of room to play with there at the back. So you can see how it's bigger at the back, and then make sure you put it through straight and level. And then I just kind of clean out that eye just a little bit. And you can use a bodkin for that. I just always use this awl because it makes it a little bit easier for me. And so you can see, there we go. That's where it's going to sit. It looks pretty good to me. I got it nice and flat there, which is what I wanted. So as you pull this, it's going to push a little bit of water, kind of do a little, maybe potentially dive, the way that head is structured. But let's go ahead and do this bass skirt. And I'm just going to use 2 tab legs for this. I know on the size this big, I sometimes might go 2.5 or 3, but I just fold it in half there and then wrap it up and around. And that tab is kind of going on a half semicircle on the bottom of the shank. And I don't want to get, a ton of wraps, and I don't want to go super snug at this point. And so I just did about 3 wraps. They're semi-loose, and then I'm going to grab this hot fire color for the top, and then I'll pull it and have those meet. So I was pulling up so that the joints meet at the halfway point, and then I'll check it to make sure it looks good. And then here's where I'll do about 2 or 3 wraps, and this is where it helps to have a really good thread. And I'll work my way up through that to the front portion. And this is not traditionally what you do with a bass skirt, but with this, the way I'm doing this fly and the howitzer head, I'm going to build up a little bit of a thread dam here. And I'm not really going over any of the tab legs. I'm just building up a thread dam that will stop that howitzer head from sliding further back into that skirt. So like I said, this isn't, usually I just slide it on, but for this one, being the way it is, I really want to make sure it just looks the part in case this doesn't get fished. And so we'll go ahead and whip finish with our thread right here in the middle, because I don't want to ruin my tongue right there. And this is going to be covered in glue, which will make it even more durable. And then the key is we're going to trim our bass skirt here, and I don't want to have it foul up the rear wiggle section, and so I'm not going to have it be super long, but I want it to be long enough that it curls back on its own. So if you cut it too short, they're going to want to splay out
almost straight. And so it's a happy medium is what I've kind of found. I'm sure there's some more bass experts that tie more of these out there, but you can see how that poof is right there. And that's where you can imitate so many different species of fish just with the simple skirt. And these tab lakes come in so many colors, but I really just am trying to color coordinate this. Usually I do a lighter color on the bottom, and then they make some white ones that have a little bit of a silver flash to it, or a little bit of glitter. I really like those. And then the top I of course do to match what I'm doing. Usually it's an olive orange combination with some browns. And for the howitzer head and any popper head I usually use this liquid fusion because it's waterproof, flexible, and I guess I better check if it's waterproof. I know it's non-foaming, so it's not going to expand on you, but I'll have to do some research on that. I've used it a ton and have a lot of confidence in it, but it doesn't melt down the foam either, or if you color your heads, it doesn't affect the color unless you, I guess I haven't really worked it, but I've never had one bleed on me. So as I put this on, I'm just going to kind of twist it so I'm not pushing all the glue back, and then I'm going to position it where I want it, and bam, there you go. You can see I got that little red spot out there like it's the tongue. I guess that's my little flare mark I like to do. And then that bass skirt's going to bond with that liquid fusion a little bit. When I hang this to dry, I'm going to run some mono through that hook eye and let it hang vertically so that bass skirt's going back in case any of that liquid fusion wants to seep back. But you can see right there, that's really fun. It's a wiggly popper. The rear moves a little bit, and it's not bulk on the hook shank. And then I'm going to let this dry, usually about 2-3 hours before I really want to mess with the head. And what we'll do for the head is I'll be covering it in a flexible resin. But there you go. That's the wiggly popper, the major portion, the fly. The last step is we just got to cover it with a flex resin. I've been playing around with this Raid Zap flex resin and just kind of coat it evenly. You could paint these white heads a lot of different colors with markers. But like I said, if I'm doing that, I usually prep it first. So it's dry now. Let's go ahead and see how we do this. I'm going to show you a little bit of fun on this one. We're going to add a little bit of glitter since we didn't color the head. And I'm just going to take this flexible resin and I'm going to brush it here on the bottom of section. That's the part that the fish see. The top, not so much. But the fish are going to see this bottom part. So I'm going to lay the resin here, being very careful not to get it on the eyes, because this is not really at this point to protect the head. This is just to lay down a little wet mess that we can sprinkle some glitter on without the glitter going kind of everywhere. And so I'm just laying down a little thin coat here, and I'll kind of smooth it out. I didn't put down a ton of material or a ton of resin. I'm just kind of spreading it out so I don't have any clumps. You could put this, you don't really need to put it in a drying wheel or worry about it being even. And I just have some cheap glitter here, nothing special. It's just a really pearl color, and I'm just going to sprinkle it where we put the resin. And you can see some of it's falling off. That is because there's no resin there. And then I'll just kind of give it a couple ding-dings with my finger. I don't want to touch that wet resin with the glitter, and so I'm just popping off any excess. And I want to make sure I got these eyes kind of clear, since this is the whole purpose of this fly is behind the eyes. And so I'll just kind of brush off any resin there into that gap, and then make sure you got your UV light handy, and I'll go ahead and cure it. And our glitter is now not going to get everywhere. And so the next step is we're just going to be covering this whole head in resin. And I've played around with this material. It's a semi-new product, and so I haven't really tested it a lot on the water. And so I've been doing 2 coats just to make sure that this is to protect your paint job, but also I like this to hold the eyes in. And so I usually put on a fair amount and spread it out pretty even with the brush here. I really like the application that it's got a brush in there, and then I really glob it on the eyes. So I kind of will run the brush against that eye so that we're getting plenty of resin around that eye, because that's where we spend our money on, is these eyes. We want to make sure we keep them on there. And then of course I'll cover the front portion here as well, and making sure that everything's got a nice even coat. And I'll even go over the glitter. Even though we just barely did it, it is cured, and that's the cool part about doing the resin with the glitter, is once you cure it, it's not going to brush off. You can see I'm not getting anything on the rest of the fly. There may be a few stragglers, but the key is I always glitter the bottom when I'm having fun, and that's what the fish see. So just make sure you do a nice, real even coat. Since this is resin, and we're going to cure it, you want to make sure you get it as even as possible, because you're not going to be putting it on a drying wheel with most of the flexible epoxies I've used, and that way you have overnight that it will sit there and shift and you get an even form. We have, as long as you want right now, but I'm going to cure this right now. And so I'm just kind of spinning it around, making sure I don't have any major drips or lumps, and I was really good to make sure I got a clean coverage, and then I'll cure it up. Side note, make sure you put your brush back in your black bottle, otherwise you'll have to pick up some spare brushes. So we'll give that a really, really good cure, 20-30 seconds, because I just want to do a little bit of a longer cure since we're bonding it on the foam. And then the key is I've been doing 2 coats on this, because the first coat, it's still just a little bit tacky. And I know that this is not, it says tack free, but it's a flexible resin. It still leaves my fingerprint in it. But when I do a second coat, and I'll really hit it with the light again. And on the second coat, you really got to be careful. I'm not putting a ton down. This is just to make sure I've got every inch of this covered, just as a precautionary measure. And after I cure this again, I'm going to set it in a little holder I have here. And then I often will just, the next day, since I often tie at night, I will lay this out in the sun for a little bit, because that is the best curing method. In my opinion, is let it sit out in the sun, and then it's golden. So just make sure when you brush this on that you give a really, really even good coat. You can see how that glitter just sparkles and shimmers. Glitter is awesome. Such a inexpensive product that adds so much to your fly. It makes it a lot more, I think in this particular fly, a little bit more fishy. So, because that's going to be reflecting light like crazy. But you should have a lot of fun tying this up. It's fairly easy to fly. You could bypass the whole wiggle part with the rear section, but that's a lot of fun. You could also add another a stinger hook or a trailer hook, and make it a little bit longer. I've done that before, but most of my hookups, usually with especially bass fishing, is on the main hook. I'd almost say 85% of them. Rarely do I hook up on the rear hook, and usually that's because I think I missed the hook set on the first go. So there we go. That's the cool part about using the resin. It is cured, so tie some up, and thanks for watching.